I am truly overwhelmed. But you know, folks, and you have all heard me say this at one point or another in this campaign, I have always believed that the people of Alabama had more in common than to divide us. The African American community, thank you.
And Latasha are in town because we are so proud and excited.
Yes.
And I am excited because they are our new partners. I don't say client anymore. I'm getting out of that corporate rat race. And they are partners and they are co-collaborators and co-creators. So then we started talking and it was clear that Latasha and Cliff were architects. They don't take the full credit. But just like anyone who's an architect, right, Rick? You build a framework. You create the plans. You're going to need other contractors and collaborators and designers and everyone else. But the architect is going to get the framework in place. And that is what they are, and that is what they did. So our next conversation was, how can we help you? How can we work with you? So I want to first of all give them a hand. Alabama, right? The victory for most of us was a stunning surprise. Not for them. So I would like to turn it over to my colleagues, partners, co-collaborators, friends. Troublemakers and mean boys.
Good trouble.
Good trouble. Good trouble.
Good trouble.
And good mean boys, right? To kind of share with you where they are and what they're doing. And I want to thank all of you for coming. Thank you.
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. Well, the last thing I did wrong, I stayed in the wilderness a day too long. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on. Is not the song or even me singing, but there's a particular spirit of resistance that I come from a people in the deep South that we've maintained that spirit. Even when the world wasn't thinking about Alabama or thinking about the South, those of us that live in the South, have been in the South, have fought in the South, know that there is a current of resistance and a rich history of black resistance in the South. And because of that, that's what drove our work and really kind of set the frame of what we did. The Alabama win did not happen in December. The Alabama win is a culmination over a period of time of folks doing voting rights work, of people passing laws, of having lawsuits. We even had some lawsuits about 12 years ago around voting for just constant kind of resistance and organizing, right? And then it's almost like you have a perfect storm where when the right opportunity reaches the right moment, this is what you have. So in that spirit, what I want to, and I wanted to sing that song because I'm from a little city, some of y'all may have heard of, called Selma, Alabama. And I actually, it's so funny, in my space in philanthropy, I take people down there, they was like, y'all love to sing. I said, we sure do. We like to sing now. But in that space, what I kind of want to share and just give some context with is what everybody's thinking. What in the hell happened in Alabama? Right? What happened? And I think there's a couple of things. Like I said, I think it's kind of as a continuation of what people don't see or what people don't know. That there's this kind of idea and this thought that there's not infrastructure in the South It's not true. Matter of fact, even if we go to our neighboring state in Mississippi, the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, his name is Chokwe Lumumba. Right? I just need that to sit for a minute. Right? And his father comes out of a real strong spirit and history of resistance. I just want y'all to find me anywhere else in America that has a mayor named Chokwe Lumumba. I'm raising that to say there is a really strong progressive voice and progressive infrastructure that exists in the South that's often overlooked because it's always in this context of national politics. It's on election day, particularly in presidential elections, if the state goes red or blue, right? And if the state goes red, then that means the state is red and the party surrenders to that's a red state. There's not investment put in those states. You don't see philanthropy put in investment in those states. And because there's this idea that somehow the political framework, this national political framework actually runs the day, right? But those of you, anybody in here who took a political science class, and most of us had to, I was a political science major, but had to take a political science class, one of the first things they teach you is all politics is local. It's local, right? And we knew that, and we actually tapped into that. So I'm going to try to give this short version of just some context of what happened in Alabama. I think some of y'all, if I were to think and people would ask me, like, really what happened, there were a couple of things. One, there was a certain kind of climate. Like a climate there's a particular kind of climate, there's a national climate. Let me see, those of us that are from the Deep South, when people start saying, make America great again, we know what that means. We know code words. Now, everybody else may be confused about what that means. We know code words. Right? We know code words. The second thing is, so there's a particular kind of climate that we find ourselves that's very racially polarizing. Right now, it's very intense and then very conservative. Right? Some people get afraid and like, what we're going to do, that's when we know we got to put our boots on. It's like, all right, we got to put the boots on. Right? And so that particular climate, the national climate, I think even more so in Alabama, while Roy Moore had his own baggage, believe it or not, I don't think that the negative of Roy Moore was enough to be able to drive what happened in Alabama, quite frankly. But Trump represented something different. So, and black voters in the state of Alabama saw Charlottesville. We hear the language. We know what it means when you're bringing Steve Bannon down to the state to campaign. And guess what? I'm from the Black Belt, and in the Black Belt area, Jeff Sessions came out of the Black Belt. So we know Jeff Sessions, right? So we know this whole gang of people who were elected. So there's a particular kind of political climate that we were familiar with that at least got the antenna up. The second thing that happened, though, is now you've got this deeply damaged candidate. So now you got Roy Moore, who's this deeply damaged candidate that now the national media is now talking about this election in Alabama. So I think that helped a little bit in terms of people knowing there's something happening, but that still wasn't enough. We think that to move people to action, but it was like enough happening to the extent that there was some investment. So there were some other operations that came in the state, like Black PAC came in the state, were supported to come in the state. There was a campaign called Woke Vote that was led by a young sister named DeWanna Thompson, who actually focused on colleges and churches. And there were some resources that, not a lot of resources, but resources that come to the state in a state that never gets resources in those kind of elections, right? So I think that had a particular kind of element as well. Then there's a third element of, it's one thing to have the candidate, does your candidate have a negative that's big enough to make people come out? I debate that. I'm not sure if he did or not. Because it's one thing how the North sees something. That's something different how people locally or in the South see something. So that's debatable. I go back and forth on that. I'm not sure enough. But what I do know is that the candidate, Doug Jones' candidate, let me just give you some facts about his campaign. So what happens in his campaign. So this Democratic candidate, I go home to visit my family because I'm in Alabama. We go to Alabama like we go to the grocery store. And I'm like it's down the road, because I guess technically it is down the road. But I go to my family's home, and I'm sitting down, and the television ad comes on, and it's a Confederate soldier. It's a Confederate general. So it opens up with a Confederate general, and it gives a description who this Confederate general is, and then it gives a description of who this Union general is, and then out walks Doug Jones, the Democrat, saying, you know, this is what they were. What they did is Confederate general such and such and Union general such and such. They made a compromise. They were able to compromise. Now, y'all do know what the compromise was, right? Okay. So, we would have compromised. But okay. Nevertheless, so they made this compromise, and I want to be the candidate that you send to D.C. that can make, that didn't work, that can compromise, right? Now, this is the Democratic candidate.
Exactly.
Who, okay? So we're dealing with that. Secondly, there was a lot of, which most of the political campaigns, they put a lot of resources, particularly national campaigns. For some reason, national campaigns really believe that the way to win is an air war. Like, not ground war, but an air war. So we're going to put all of our money in literature and mail outs. So I go to my family's house, and I go to, actually my partner's house, and there are 10 mailings, huge, full color, beautiful mailings. Of the 8 mailings, every single one of them, it's Roy Moore's picture, it's his name. Now, they were supposed to be negative, but if you all know working class folk, when we're coming home, we are looking at stuff about, you get your mail, you look at it, you throw it on the table, right? If you do that much. My family, my aunt actually thought Roy Moore was sending her stuff. It wasn't from Roy Moore. It was from Doug Jones' camp. The only way that I knew it was from Doug Jones' camp is I was like, this is so bad. Who did this? And I turn on the back of it, and it says committed to elect Doug Jones. So they sent out 9 mailings of huge, expensive mailings that in some ways actually gave name recognition to the opposing candidate. Did not have Doug Jones on anywhere. And then they were dated. For example, it would have images of the civil rights movement, the voting rights movement, and then this candidate, getting back to Doug Jones, his message to black people, or to mobilize black people, was, I was the prosecuting attorney in the Birmingham bombing. Now, the challenge with that is Cliff and I weren't even born when it happened, and many of you in this room, right? If you got to reach back 50 years
To what you did.
I'm just saying, right? So even in that context, so it wasn't really a strong campaign that actually resonated or actually was directed to black voters, right? In addition to that, this is just some basic, like, organizing stuff, right? In the South, we don't do cold. Y'all know that, right? And we absolutely don't do snow. Not what we do, right? Snow is like kryptonite, right? And so 3 days before the election, it actually snowed, right? And I mean, like, the snow that sticks. We really don't get the snow that sticks. That stuck. And it's interesting. Some background. What was interesting is that this election was supposed to take place this year. What happened is we had a governor that had some sexual exploits and wound up having to resign, and which brought in a lieutenant governor, which is Kay Ivey. When she came into office, she immediately, her first week in office, she set the election on December the 13th. Now, December the 12th. She actually was a proponent, even when all the other stuff came out, she was like, I'm going with Roy Moore. So there was this thought that it's 2 weeks before Christmas, black folk ain't going out to vote, right? Because one, it's too cold, and it's right before Christmas, right? And it's and it's in December, and we don't do December elections. So you have all of that backdrop. I'm gonna give a little cheat sheet just to fast forward in terms of how wonderful the state of Alabama is last Friday, because black folks performed so well in the special election. What did the state do? The state house actually passed a bill that eliminated all special elections. From this day forward, the governor will actually make the appointment and they will run the term out. That's the kind of environment people are dealing with. In addition to that environment, there is, most of you may know, but about 2 years ago we talked about voter suppression. Because I really need y'all to know how extraordinary this was, and not necessarily in terms of lifting our work, but how extraordinary people are in the black belt in particular. I want to raise, but the state said, well, we're gonna close some of these driver's license places. for the people to get their ID. We're going to close some of those off. They closed 10 of them in the state. The challenge is every single one of the 10 were in a county with a population of African-American population of 70% or more, right? Activists actually got together, and many of the folks that we worked with on this campaign and got that reversed. And actually, they opened it back up. But that's the kind of environment that our folks are in. So leads us back to, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cliff, in terms of lead us where we found ourselves. So one, we found ourselves in a space that we did not see who was actually speaking to black people. There was this assumption that if we say he white and he racist, that's enough. Now, that's a pretty bad thing, but that's actually quite common, right? So it's not as remarkable as some people would like to think it is, right? So that wasn't enough. There was one piece that got put out, Black Pac did put out a piece that said, was the only piece that I saw that even mentioned that there was an issue. So in terms of, so then what we did, and then I want Cliff to talk about kind of Black Voters Matter, so y'all can at least know a little bit about who we are and what we did. We knew, and we were getting phone calls. There were a couple of things that were greatly concerned us. One thing that concerned us is the black belt was not, nobody was making investment in the black belt. Now there are organizations that exist in the black belt, and there are political folks who were doing. And actually one of the first campaigns that started was a campaign started by 5-year-old Sheree called the Vote or Die campaign. Right. That started actually almost when it was announced, she started, right? In the black belt, but we did not see any investment. Many of the groups did not see any investment in the black belt region because normally there's this particular strategy that says you focus on urban areas, right? And although you've got the black belt that goes actually all the way across to South Carolina, through Georgia, Alabama, where you've got concentrated numbers of black folks, that you completely marginalize that group. Now, how are you going to build state power? And so the flip of that, the question is, if the rise of the Republican Party was white rural voters, is it possible that there's some progressive possibilities in those rural areas as well? Mm-hmm. That is what Alabama demonstrated, right? That it wasn't just the disenchantment of white folks. White folks ain't the only people that live in the rural South. Right, but there is a larger disenchantment around how rural communities are treated and marginalized and not invested in. That is actually real, and which is what Trump tapped into. So to kind of get ready to close up and turn it over to Cliff. What we do is we build infrastructure. We like to say we build infrastructure. We see ourselves as quilters. There's already the pieces of the quilt. There's already the thread. All we do, we're quilters. So we don't go into a community believing that a community is not resourced or does not have any infrastructure. We don't have the privilege in the Deep South not to have somebody that cut up at least every once in a while. Right? So the key is to find where are there organizations who are on the front line of doing movement building work. Secondly, we saw the election, and even in this piece, and then we saw this election as an opportunity to bring groups together. So part of what we were able to do is kind of our key and our key pieces is that we also knew how important the messaging was. I'll say this and then Cliff, I'll say around our messaging. We didn't hear and see any messages for black folks. What we knew is consistently what campaigns do, they usually give a couple of messages for black people. One message is, somebody died for you, so you need to vote. Now that's good, yes, that's true, right? But is that really the only reason why I need to vote? Right, and does that speak to younger folks? I'm not even sure if that is even effective with me, right? And I have a deep appreciation as a movement person for that, but there's usually this message that's in this context of you're obligated to vote because you got to vote because somebody else did something, so you got to vote, right? And we think that has limited ability to be able to move people. Or there's this message that we're being chastised. That some way black folks don't vote and you don't whatever, and there's this negativity that feeds into this narrative that as if something is wrong with us, right? That does not take into account the kind of investment, some of the other things. So what we did in terms of our messages were a couple of things. One, we wanted to have a message that affirmed who we were and affirmed and spoke to the spirits and lives of black folks to see themselves as being able to make a difference, which is why we are Black Voters Matter, not Black Votes Matter. Right, because votes might matter to some folks when the folks that vote don't matter, For us, black voters matter, right? And so we wanted to send kind of that message. We also wanted to tap into kind of the message of affirming that part of our tagline was I matter, you matter, we matter. So we wanted to tap into this idea that you individually matter, right? And we as a collective matter. And we have to think of it in that terms. And then the third thing we wanted to do, which was the flip side of what we used particularly in this campaign, was we decided, Cliff and I and others that we work with, that our big line was, it's about us. And we actually went hard with our messaging saying that this ain't about the Republicans, this ain't about the Democrats, this ain't about this candidate and that candidate, because the challenge is when you make it centered around the candidate, when the candidate is not weak or does not perform, it feeds into for people being apathetic. So what we did is we said intentionally, but what it is about, it's all about us. It's about us. And it was affirming and people saw it, and we could even talk about kind of our t-shirts with a big hit because people would run down the street trying to get t-shirts. They still bothering us about those t-shirts. So with that being said, we moved resources, we organized folks, we helped kind of thread the infrastructure. I'm going to turn over to Cliff to talk more specifically about
Front. I'm not going to sing. You wouldn't want it, so I'm doing you a favor. I'm not going to talk long because I don't ever want to be the person that's standing between the crowd and the wine. So, but I do want to just talk about we have 5 key beliefs that basically guide all of our work. And Latasha touched on a couple of them, so let me just go through a couple briefly. The first is that we believe that in order for black voters to matter, that we have got to use existing infrastructure, existing local infrastructure. And Latasha talked about how what we did was we raised funds and we seeded into 32 organizations. I see one of our early funders standing right in front of me. But what we did was we seeded into 32 organizations that spanned 18 counties throughout Alabama. And we just believe that it's important that you use that local infrastructure for the reasons that Latasha talked about. You do no good when all you do is you come in, you parachute in, you go around the existing, because those organizations are the ones that, one, have the existing relationships, right? They can be more effective with whatever the dollar is that you put in than any other organization can, because they're there. They know the folks, they have the relationships, they know the issues, right? And so we believe strongly in supporting the organizations that are already on the ground. Secondly, we have got to demonstrate that black voters matter 365 days out of the year. And so that's very much tied closely to the first one, because those organizations are doing work 365 days out of the year. And not in all cases was it social justice work or electoral work. Some of the organizations are doing service provision. Because you keep in mind that many of our organizations that do service, it's not because they're anti-social justice, it's because what? And you got some philanthropy folks. That's where the money's at, right? Because it's easier. Folks feel comfortable funding the service, but not as comfortable funding the social justice work. The organizing work is too risky, it's too controversial. So many of our service organizations want to do that, but they don't have the resources. We came in and provided them resources because we know that they do the work 365 days out of the year. Third thing is, Latasha touched on this as well, we have got to demonstrate black voters matter everywhere.
Yes.
Black voters matter wherever they may be. And that includes the city. You know, it's one of the ironies of my life that I'm born and raised in New York, but I've been in the South now for 20 years, in the rural South for 10 of those years. And I'm one of the staunchest advocates that we have got to support black folks in the rural communities. Those counties that at the end of the night, if you were watching the election results coming in that night, the ones that folks were waiting for were Dallas County, which maybe you heard of because Dallas County is where Selma is the county seat, right? But how many of us knew where Hale County was? Most folks watching CNN and MSNBC that night couldn't find Hale. They could find someplace in Iraq before they could find Hale County, Alabama. But all eyes were on Hale County, and that's the county that put him over the top.
How many black folks in the county?
And we got
80%.
Yeah, 80%. But it's small, and so people feel like, you know, it's not worth investing in because there's only a population of 20,000 or 15,000. But at the end of the day, if you look at the votes that Doug Jones got, if I were to ask you, if I were to say to you, you know what, I want to mobilize black voters in Alabama, but I'm not going to put any money into Tuscaloosa, or I'm not going to put any money into Montgomery, or I'm not going to put any money in Huntsville, you'd kind of look at me crazy, right? Because you figure, well, those are cities, you know, there's black folks there. Why would you not put money into some place where you could get a certain number of black votes, right? But when you look at the votes that Doug Jones got, he got about 47,000 from those 18 black belt counties. Well, that's more than the votes he got in Tuscaloosa. That's equal to the votes he got in Montgomery. So when you ignore those black belt counties, you're basically ignoring a black city. You are basically saying, I'm just going to ignore this place where I can get as many votes as I can get in a Tuscaloosa or Montgomery or Mobile or Huntsville. It makes no sense. But many of us take that approach. Even some of our progressive organizations have that attitude. Like black voters in rural counties don't exist. So they exist and they matter, and that's part of the messaging that we were trying to communicate, which is the fourth point. We believe that in order for black voters to matter, we have got to communicate in a way that is authentic and that speaks truth to power. And like Latasha said, these shirts, you couldn't go on a bus and hold up a Doug Jones shirt
That's right.
and get this reaction,
That's right.
right? When folks saw our shirts with the messages said, I matter, you matter, we matter, black voters matter, it's about us. Folks lit up.
You got any t-shirt? I know.
I didn't bring them tonight. I usually do bring them, but I didn't bring them tonight. But right, yeah.
He'll get some.
Right. But the point is that the message, the authentic messaging, you know, our commercial, which spoke about. Did we even mention Doug Jones in the commercial? We mentioned more and more.
We said he wasn't Martin Luther King.
That's right. That's what he said. Literally, our commercial starts off saying, one is a racist and an accused pedophile, and the other one,
Well, he ain't no Martin Luther King.
but folks responded to that because that's what folks were saying in the street. Like, I don't know about that. I ain't feeling this Doug Jones, right? But when we go out, even when you take folks who have the existing relationships, if you combine it with a weak message, an inauthentic message, a message that folks aren't feeling, you just killed the messenger. Now, I lost my street cred because I'm going out here trying to tell you that Doug Jones is a man, and you know he ain't the man, right?
Right.
And so we've got to be authentic in our messaging, and that's what all of our, not just the shirts, but our push cards, our radio ads, all of our communications, we're authentic to our folks. And then lastly, this last, but it's definitely not least. In fact, you know, sometimes when I talk, I say, well, it's really 5, but it should be 1, and then 5 should go back to 1, because the last one is about the who. All of these are laid out in like, to do my elementary school teachers, you know, honor is who, what, where, when, why, right? The last one is the who. And it's not just who in terms of black voters, but it's a particular segment of black voters. Anybody want to take a guess?
Women.
Thank you. Right. It's about black women. We got folks now who are recognizing that we got to listen to black women, that we need to trust black women. But we are trying to send a message, we have got to invest in black women. It's nice for you to listen to me and trust me, but I need you to invest in black women. And when you look at not just the results, we all know about the results. 98% of black women voted for Doug Jones. We get that. We knew it going back to the 2016 presidential, right? Black women trying to save the world.
As always.
As always, right? So, but it's not just about that. It's about the organizations that are being led by black women, right? Most of the organizations we supported were led by black women, right? And so, and then even the ones that, you know, because not all of our 32 were black. We had a group out of Birmingham that was a Latino-led immigrant justice coalition, led by brown women, right? And so
We had white women.
We had white women, a reproductive justice group that we worked with, who, you know, speaking about building infrastructure, wasn't one of our original contacts. But through this process, through our method of identifying who's doing legit work, we kept hearing about this group. And they were white-led, but we kept hearing that they were doing legit work in our community.
That's right.
So if they doing legit work, we gotta support that infrastructure. So, but again, women-led. But we believe that we have got to invest in black women. And everywhere we go, we tell folks, if you are in a room that is dealing with social justice, electoral issues, whatever, and you don't see black women, somewhere at the table or in leadership, right?
Come on.
Something's wrong with that room, right? You might need to be in a different room. You might not be in quite the right room. But if you look around and that's what you see, something's wrong with that picture. We've got to invest in black women. So those are our 5 key beliefs, and we're in the process now of moving beyond Alabama into at least 4 other southern states, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, and using the same methods, and maybe even 1 or 2 northern states, because
south.
we've right. Because as brother Malcolm said, if you south of the Canadian border,
You south right now. Right now, you south.
so a couple of northern states, because we've had folks who have been interested in Michigan, from Ohio, and even Minnesota. Which kind of boggled our minds when they first suggested it. So, but we're trying to be smart about how we grow. But what we know is that this approach is needed in a lot of places, and that we believe we have something to offer to the conversations. We believe that we have a skill at identifying the groups that are doing good work and need to be supported. And so we're just glad that you all were here to learn a little bit about our story and to join us on this road forward. Thank our